Give it a second, sorry. All right. You can go ahead and call the meeting to order, Mike. I'm not Mike, sorry, or not.
Night, everyone. Good evening. I call this meeting to order.
And then I will pull up the meeting protocols. Sorry, it's too many things on one small screen. May have to just go from here. My apologies. Can't get this to move. Oh, the joy of technology. All right, we'll just do this. Hello, everybody. My name is Heather Sandine, and I'm serving as the technical host for tonight's meeting. Thank you for your grace and patience as we adjust to being back in person for our board members. So the city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement process, please visit that link. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Because we do not have registration for open and public comment tonight, you can indicate that you would like to participate by using the raise hand function. The raise hand button is in the participant box, which can be found in the menu by hovering over the top or the bottom of your screen and then clicking on the participant icon. When the box opens, you will see the raise hand button at the bottom. By clicking the button, you can indicate you would like to participate in open or public comment. And if you have joined us by phone, you can press 9 to raise your hand. All right, back to you, Arnon.
Okay. I present the motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting, May 3rd, 2023. Anybody second?
A second.
Okay. And so now let's go ahead and do some public participation.
I don't see any hands up. So just as a reminder, if you are interested in participating and speaking tonight, just please indicate that with your hand. We have Lynn Siegel up first.
Yeah, I just got soaked. Farmer's market. Landmarks Board and EAB are at the same time. And we just reviewed solar panels to go on some landmarked places today. And the interesting thing is the balance between the two boards. They almost went to the point where they said, well, we should just make this a staff thing, which they always approve the solar panels. And they're always, I would never let them get away with changing the angle just for the appearance to the public or anything. So they're, pretty right on to environmentalism, and it seems like a waste to bring it through the LDRC. But in any case, what I wanted to bring up with the EAB is the need for there to be a coordination with Housing Advisory Board and Planning Board, in that what we need to design in Boulder and EAB should be right behind this, is housing that accommodates more people naturally. What I'm proposing is there should be a minimum of 500 or 600 square feet per person in a house, and you have 2 refrigerators or maybe 3 refrigerators. You have 1 washer dryer. You have 1, for having all of this infrastructure, all of this plumbing, all of this electrical, all, of this expense. It's a huge expense, and we have an affordable housing crisis in the United States, and it's your business as EAB to fix this, because environmentalism goes right along with how we're managing our population. And the way it works is we get all kinds of funding to promote more population, but that just goes up and up. And then we have more and more environmental hazards and problems to deal with. So it's perfect if that's the situation you want to have, because you want to keep your jobs, but you've got a big enough job already. There's plenty of work to do. What needs to be done is more efficient housing for people per square foot, so you can get more people in a place. For example, parking restrictions are always lifted at the planning board because, these 300 square foot places, which are too small for a person anyway, those places, they aren't going to use a car. Well, guess what? People have stuff, and people do use the car. Even if it's the Uber's crowding the streets, going up to the storage closet. So it's really critical that we have livable spaces for people, so that they're going to the mountains for their commute instead of to the storage closet across town. And that affects, the congestion and everything else. And when you have people living multi-generationally in household units, they work better together for less cars.
Lynn, your time is up. Do you want to lose?
I don't even have my timer on the screen. So if you guys could do that, that would really help.
Yes, we can do that. Thanks, Lynn. If you have any additional comments, feel free to email them to the board. All right, next up we have Karen Hallwig. And Karen, if you could just wait 1 second, I will get that timer up.
I don't want to speak now. I want to speak when you're addressing the revision of goals.
I don't think you can do that. What is it?
I don't believe so. I think it's in the
On most boards in the city, there's usually a staff presentation and board discussion
Yes.
before a vote is taken on a scheduled agenda item. And I wanted to listen to the staff presentation first before I make my comment.
We don't take votes in this
Yeah.
board. We're not a.
You
not
don't
like
make
planning
any
board.
you don't make any recommendations to anyone?
We make recommendations, but we don't take an official vote. We just discuss among us, ask questions, and then present our points of view to staff. And according to our guideline, what about
the bylaws.
bylaws?
Okay, so it's not possible for me to hear the staff presentation first.
Unfortunately, no.
You can definitely email us after the meeting.
Yes.
Well, but by that time you will have made your recommendation, right?
Yes, but. Well,
I will also say there's some, following this, according to our packet, we will have this initial discussion, and I think this will come back to us for a second round. So there will be future opportunity for us to take into account if you decide to email us any comments that you have.
Okay.
There will be opportunity for us to take that into account.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And just to clarify, it sounds like she was speaking about some of the maybe quasi judicial boards, which maybe is not, but that was a great recommendation. Thank you, Alex.
okay, so there's no more public participation.
Just double check. No, that's all.
So So let's move on to the main item today, the introduction to the 2024 City of Boulder Energy Conservation Code Development Project. All right, guys.
Sure, I can. Multitasking. Should not be doing that. Good evening, and thank you for having us. My name is Edward Stafford. I'm a senior manager in Planning and Development Services, and was serving as the interim chief building official until recently. You'll learn why in just a moment, the introductions here, but helping support this project, especially through the process. With us tonight is Rob Adrians from the end down here. He's our new chief building official. He is in week 4.
Yes.
So he's quite new at this point, but doing kind of speed. And also joining us is Josh Hanson. Josh joined us in October as our expert in the energy code, energy conservation code, and their principal energy code compliance examiner in the building services group. You probably know Carolyn. I'm sure she's appeared in front of you before, and as a joint effort in this project between the Planning and Development Services Department and Climate Initiative. Carolyn is also serving on the team doing the work. Tonight's presentation will be by Josh.
Thank you very much. One other person I will mention that is not actually with us tonight is Brad Mueller. He is also on this team, so I just wanted to make sure we make mention of Brad. And as we mentioned earlier, I got my screen a little bit here, so apologies. So the agenda title really for tonight is an introduction to the 2024 Energy Code for the City of Boulder. As many of you may be aware, the city has a vision to reduce our carbon emissions by 70% by 2030, reach net zero carbon emissions by 2035, and look to be a carbon positive city by 2040. Or another way to look at it is that our buildings actually remove more carbon dioxide than they produce. Before we really get into this, I wanted to give a quick background on the history of where our energy code came from. And then once we get into some of the updates and the real substance of the presentation, we'll get into more of what we're looking at proposing for the future update. So starting with the residential energy code map, first and foremost, I want to explain that a residential building consists of really a 1 and 2 family dwelling, a townhome, or an R3 or an R4 occupancy. R3 occupancy is a boarding home or a dormitory sorority. R4 is usually going to be like an assisted living facility. This energy code, our very first energy code here at the city was actually the 2017 COBEC. And it was one of the very first energy codes to look at pushing the envelope to, no pun intended, to net zero energy. And so we required that for any any homes that were 5,000 square feet and larger. As you can see from the scale at the right, the 2017 requirement, anything lower than 5,000 would be at a HERS of 60. And then the scale would, as the home got larger, it would get closer to 0 as it got closer to the 5,000 on the square foot number. And so you can see as it was tracking, we were looking at really shrinking that number to get closer to net zero. And we'll explain later on that conversation. While we're still looking at that, we're looking at different avenues as well to look at incorporating a reduction in carbon as also. The 2020 COBEC actually looked at reducing this square footage down to 3,000 square feet. And one thing to really note here is the majority of the homes that come through the city that are new construction are this 3,000 square feet. So the majority of these homes are going to be net zero that we see. Another thing we also introduced here is performance backstops. And these can be seen in our values for the envelope and for the actual building itself. These values are untradeable, so you can't model out of these. And so we're looking at insulation, roof insulation, wall insulation, window values, things of that nature. We also introduced solar ready and offset requirements for single family homes. And so offset requirements, anything outside of the home or the dwelling unit, if it was a fossil fuel, has to be fully offset with renewable energy. And then the last thing that we introduced in this most recent version we have now is our EV ready requirements, which requires 1 EV space for our new construction projects. On the commercial front, a commercial building is really defined as not a residential building. One interesting thing to note here is it also includes our multifamily buildings. And so multifamily is included under our commercial scope because the multifamily R2 occupancy is included under the International Building Code. And so therefore it falls under the commercial guidance for our codes. The 2017 COBEC was really where this all started. Okay. we started with having a 30% savings over our ASHRAE 2010 baseline. Another way to look at this is 2012 energy code. And so what we did was we looked at that. We wanted to do something better than what they were requiring. So we required a 30% savings above that code. Another thing that was introduced with this, the 2017 COVEC was our solar ready requirement. So all commercial new construction was required to have at least 40% of the roof available for solar. In the 2020 version of our COVEC, as we move the needle forward, we really looked at moving our target. We changed our baseline model for what we're modeling everything against from the 2010 code here to the 2016 code. And so it's going to have a lot more stringent energy efficiency requirements. And as you can see, we require 20 and 25% off savings versus the 30. This is a more stringent code. Plus, if you're an all electric building, you're allowed to show a 20% reduction in energy. If it's a mixed fuel building, it was 25% reduction. And we'll talk more about that later on, as well as how that factors in. Another thing to really note here is this EUI target that we use, which is an energy use index. We were one of the first municipalities in the country to utilize this target. Similar to if anyone's ever heard of a HERS rating or an ERI, it's a similar rating for a commercial building. So it's miles per gallon for a building, really. Similar to the residential side, it introduced performance backstops. We also require a 5% energy offset for all new construction. So no matter what project it is, they have to do 5% of their energy use to be offset by solar on site. And then we also introduced not just the EV ready requirements, but also EV capable and EVSE requirements. So to give everyone a quick snapshot of where we are and where we're headed with this project, yesterday we actually met with the planning board. Tonight we're meeting with everyone here. Our next step on this trip is city council study session at the end of the month. And then we're going to be looking at doing stakeholder engagement along with community engagement to get everyone's feedback. At the end of this is really going to be our code as a city. Once we have all of that engagement, we're going to be looking at bringing it back to the planning board and the environmental advisory board as well as city council for review, and then looking to have the initial public reading in November. So to really start getting into the meat of kind of this update for our energy code here, we have 5 areas of focus. And the first 2 areas I wanted to touch on are really going to be focused on our performance targets and looking at energy efficiency and energy savings and reduction. The last 3 sections kind of pull this whole circle, or full circle, I would say, and look at electrification, natural gas, and carbon reduction overall. So jumping into this, as we mentioned earlier, we had some performance targets that were set for our residential buildings. And what we're looking at doing there is keeping our homes that are larger than 3,000 square feet at net zero. And then for anything that's less than 3,000 square feet, revisiting those targets to see what we can do to help push the envelope for energy efficiency on those smaller homes as well. So that everyone has the opportunity for energy efficiency, not just the people that can afford to build the larger homes. On the commercial front, we have 3 pathways through energy code for new construction. The first path is our model baseline path. You model the building, or you model a baseline building. You see what your target is. As long as you exceed that target, you comply. With the requirement here at the city, what we require in this path is this is the 20 or 25% savings that we were talking about earlier. What we're going to be looking at here is actually updating that number to keep with the path of what the city is looking at as we go towards net zero energy, net zero carbon. The next path here is this fixed baseline path, which actually is displayed here at the right, or at the left, excuse me. And this path really is more of a static path where you have 6 building types. They have the energy use index targets that they have to hit. And so they would model those buildings and they have to be under those targets. It's a lot simpler, but those targets are going to be a lot more strict as well. And the other limitation is there is only so many of those building types. And so what we're looking at doing with the update is updating those targets, as well as looking to add additional building types. So the items in yellow are additional areas that we could look at adding the additional targets to just allow more flexibility with the code as we move forward. And then the final item here is our measured performance outcome. So this is one of our most popular paths, I would say. Unfortunately, we haven't had anyone do this path yet through the city. And so what we're looking at doing with this update is requiring a certain building type to do the measured outcome, performance outcome, so we can start to gain data and information on this and see really how these buildings perform. This target really is not based off of design, but rather how the building performs at the end. And so you would have to gather all your utility data, you would model the building at the end to see what the energy use target is, and see if it actually marries up with what the design is saying that it should be. And so there's other caveats. We're going to look at that just to help kind of push the envelope with that option in the energy code. The next item I wanted to mention here is alternative path through residential. And so it's the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home. This home is actually, or this option has been around for the past, I want to say 10 years. There's about 30,000 homes across the country that have been certified to this program. And the real strength in this program is that it's grounded in the Energy Star program as one of the key cornerstones for this certification. And it's not grounded in looking at the older version of Energy Star. This one that we're mentioning is actually 3.2, which wouldn't go into effect till January of next year. But the backbone to this program is 2021 and the energy code envelope. So we're not just looking at going back to like a 2012 baseline. They're requiring one of the most stringent codes in the country currently, which is the 2021 energy code. It also requires Energy Star windows, Energy Star appliances, which I didn't mention on the slide. But it also requires a certification through the EPA's Indoor Air Plus, which not only you're getting an energy efficient home, but you're getting a healthy home for your family. Some interesting things about this program is you're required to keep your HVAC system inside the thermal envelope of the building. And so that's typically we see ducts in attics or in crawl spaces. So that's something that would be a little bit of a shift from what we're used to seeing. It also was one of the first programs to provide a PV ready checklist. And then lastly, it was one of the first programs to look at introducing EV ready and heat pump, water heating, and space heating ready. One of the key things to remember about this program is last year when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, there were a couple of incentives that are going to be carried forward for the next 10 years. And one of them is the 45L tax credit that actually gives, incentivizes this program for homeowners to be able to take it on and upgrade their home to reach the certification level. And then if not, possibly put solar on their home. So they get it basically zero energy ready. And then they take the leap and they have the money to help offset some of that cost for solar. So we just touched on the first two areas, really updating our performance targets and allowing for an alternative for our energy code for the residential path, at least. The last three pieces here are going to be looking at electrification and our move to look at reducing our carbon emissions. Excuse me. So the first item we're really looking at here considering is moving towards all electric requirements for new construction and level 4 alterations. So level 4 alterations, one way to think of this is you're at a level where the next step really is moving into new construction. So that's why it's lumped together with new construction and level 4. It also would have electric ready requirements for other appliances like a stove, for example. And then also we're looking at level 3 alterations and requiring those, not requiring, but encouraging them to move to electric ready by enticing them with more of a relaxed target for their ERI or their energy modeling. To really kind of push the envelope and really help with that. One thing I did want to mention too is currently Crested Butte here in the state of Colorado is the first city to have an all electric energy code. Denver is actually following pretty closely behind us. Many of you might be aware. As of January 1, commercial and multifamily will no longer be allowed to install natural gas furnaces or water heating. So this is some things for us to really kind of pay attention to as we move in this direction and just kind of be aware of, because there's a lot of things going on around the country in regards to the focus and the push for electrification. A couple other areas I want to mention real quickly is our EV charging requirements. We're really going to be looking at updating those. The model electric ready and solar ready code for the state was released last week, and 95% of our EV charging is in line with that code already. We have to up some of the ante for multifamily, and it's an increase of 5%, I believe, on the EV ready side, if I remember correctly. It goes from 10 to 15%. But we're not just going to be looking at meeting that. We're going to be looking at depending on the feedback we get, if it makes sense to push the envelope and actually move the needle on that and look at requiring more EV charging. Another side that we're looking at also is the electric bike charging in terms of multifamily. As it's become more and more prevalent across the city, we want to look at a way to I don't want to say so much as regulate this, but how to handle it and kind of focus on it, since it's becoming, we're seeing more and more of it throughout the city. So the next area here, we all talked about the electrification side. Now we're looking at what we can do to help the environment by limiting fossil fuel and natural gas use. And so we're looking at 100% offsets of natural gas. So one thing I mentioned real quickly with residential currently has these offsets in place for anything outside of the home. And so we currently require 100% offset for any fossil fuel heating that's outside of the home for a pool or a spa, things of that nature. And so what we're wanting to do here is provide some more guidance for some of the different heating options that we see outside of the home, be it electric resistant heating, maybe saunas, things of that nature that really doesn't have, it's kind of falls into more of a gray area when we look at it through the lens of code. On the commercial front, we currently didn't have really any offsets for natural gas in the buildings. And so the only thing we really had currently was the 5% energy use offset. We're looking to keep that. And then for any buildings that want to use mixed fuel, so basically natural gas and electricity, they'd have to fully offset the natural gas use from the building to help do their part to help reduce carbon as one of the city's visions and goals. So we come back here basically to full circle where we really look at the embodied carbon reduction here. And so one thing I want to note is buildings in and of themselves account for about 39% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are out there. A quarter of those gas emissions come from embodied carbon. And so many of us here we throw around the term carbon so often. It's when we refer to carbon, we're not really referring to carbon in the periodic table. We're referring to CO2. And so that's one thing I just wanted to make sure that we're all clear on. The two items that we're going to focus on here is our operational carbon as well as our embodied carbon. And so operational carbon is really what the energy code addresses. It's how the building operates, it's the energy efficiency. And so operational carbon is any carbon dioxide that is going to be put off as the building is being managed and processes and things of that nature. The embodied carbon is anything up to the turnover of the building, really in simplest terms. It's anything from manufacture, extraction, transportation, construction, through the final turn of the building. So there's a lot of ability to look at this and really kind of do our part and help reduce as much carbon as we can and just be thoughtful about this. So there are a couple of categories that they've tried to simplify things and make it a little easier to understand. And so these are kind of the biggest categories that have the lowest hanging fruit that we would say. And the first three really deal with concrete, rebar, and insulation. And as you can see, the majority of those, if you were able to follow through with those, you could have anywhere from what looks like well, on the low end, probably a 30 to 40% reduction in embodied carbon. And so this is something that we could look at as a possibility. Maybe require, here's 5 options. You have to choose 3 of them or 2 of them, and then start moving the needle in the direction that we need to really kind of focus on this reduction in embodied carbon. There are tools that are out there that can help with these carbon values and these ratings. On the single family side, it's very similar to a HERS rating or an ERI. It's a carbon rating. It's very new. And then also on the commercial side, some folks may have heard of a life cycle assessment. And so a life cycle assessment really looks at how a building impacts its environment. And it looks at from anything from the materials throughout the whole life of the building to basically deconstruction and how it's going to end. And so, well, so yeah, so basically it's the environmental impact over that process of that. So we really wanted to just give kind of it's a very broad overview. We understand that. And so our intent is to come back after we have more substance from our consultants and our work on this to really present as we move forward with these ideas. And so just to give you a quick idea of our next steps, we're looking to incorporate the feedback from planning, from the Environmental Advisory Board, and as well as City Council. Engage the stakeholders in the community after that point. Bring back to the table their feedback and recommendations, look to add that back in. And then look to the rough draft for the COBEC should be, I want to say residential is going to be around September-ish. And then October should be when we get to the commercial piece of it. And then after all of that, we're going to bring the rough draft back to the boards and the council to get everyone's feedback and make sure that is this the vision that we really want and that you guys were really envisioning with your help. And then the public reading we're targeting for November of this year. And so what I want to leave you with really are these questions that we wanted to put forth, and I know they are broad, so I apologize. We're just really early on in the process for this project right now. But we figured it's better to get in early on and to get everyone's buy-in. So the first question really wants to know, do you agree with the areas of focus that we're looking at here? Is there anything additional that you feel that we should add? And then lastly, from your experience, is there any good recommendations you might have for community engagement strategies? And I want to say thank you, everyone, for allowing me to present to you. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
In person, you get around. Oh, that's great.
It's different. It's different.
We go around so everybody gets a chance to, ask some questions. Alex, will you start?
Yeah, I guess I have a number of questions, but I guess one of them is, it seems like a significant area of focus is on buildings specifically, whether it be construction, remodeling and things like that. Is that in your, I guess, research and knowledge base, is that kind of the primary goal is focused on buildings? Because I'm also wondering, if you look at our dashboard for this, so 38% comes from electricity and 37% comes from transportation. So I'm wondering if transportation's pretty close. Is that within the scope of this? Is that something that can be addressed at all, or is that a kind of a separate issue?
I think Everett probably answered a little bit better, but I would say that's probably outside of the scope of this. Energy code typically deals with just mainly buildings and structures. But I think that that's valid, and I think that that's something we definitely would look at. It just would be outside of the scope of this project.
So just to clarify a little bit, this is just a proposal to update the building code, so it's only explicitly for buildings.
And this is a small component or a component, small of the overall strategy toward meeting the community's goals that have been adopted. And so we can only, of course, do so much at every single piece. It's adding together ultimately. If we try to tackle everything in one project, well, we never get to the end and get something out there. The goal of this really being taking us that next step, as Josh in his presentation was showing that we've been stepping in every 3 years plus or minus. And that was the goal originally in the process, was to talk about how you continue to ratchet it down in this area. There are other things that are like play, Carolyn has, I'm sure that's some value in the roadmap, and as we were working as an organization and a community. So transportation is important. And there are other aspects of the project work on that, not included this kind of.
Maybe the only thing I would add, I think if we look at sectors, buildings are still about over 2/3 of the community's emissions. So it's electricity use and gas use. And so that's why it's definitely an elevated priority. And I think the nexus with transportation are a couple of things Josh talked about in terms of at least within the building context, removing barriers to, for example, EV adoption or mobility strategies, particularly for higher density housing, multifamily properties where we don't want people having to take like their bikes up and stairs, storing in apartments and those types of things. So thinking about where that nexus is while not tackling the breadth of transportation.
Thank you.
We're doing clarifying questions first, correct?
No.
Yeah, okay. Well, before I do that, I would like to say thank you so much for the presentation. I think this is I'm very excited about everything that we talked about. I just had some clarifying questions about, I don't know if you would know some of these statistics, but I'm wondering how many of the homes in Boulder are less than 3,000 square feet? So like how large of the energy mix are we tackling with those requirements? Larger.
So I don't know off the top of my head on that, but we can definitely get back to you. You might have a ballpark idea.
Yeah, for new construction, it's almost all over 3,000 square feet, except for like ADUs and maybe some of our smaller multifamily, so townhomes type ones that might be just a little bit smaller, but they're still kind of as that curve is, just over the curve. So basically, almost all of our new freestanding construction is falling under that. And we were at roughly half was over 5,000 square feet. Yeah, but it's not a large number, right?
Yeah.
I think we got this aspect planning board,
Right.
you know, it's maybe like 1% per year relative to our existing housing stock, so it's
Yeah.
not a huge number, but yeah.
Okay. That actually also brings up another question. So EDUs are considered, like, constructing an ADU is considered its own construction, even if it's like on the same plot of land. Okay. Yeah, I'll just think about that for a second.
No worries.
Yeah,
Well, I
and-
would clarify that. It depends whether it's attached or detached.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
incorporated into the main
Yeah,
structure,
yeah,
as part of the overall square footage
Yeah.
or a detached building.
Okay,
And then be on its own piece.
yeah, that's yeah, that's interesting, also to, I guess, I'm just thinking out loud, but to, so I guess when you give scores for building energy use, the ADU would have its own score versus the main property.
If it's detached.
If it's
Yeah,
detached.
if it's
Right.
Yeah,
Right, if it's detached, but. I guess my question would be, is it possible for somebody who wanted to, let's like. Take an extreme example of somebody wanted to skirt some of these requirements, especially for offsets. Could they run their line of like natural gas pipeline or the gas pipeline or yeah, let's just say the gas pipeline, because I can't say from the ADU to the original property and have the ADU be the smaller and not be required to have those energy offsets.
they would share the same meter,
Yeah.
so it
Okay,
would make
it
a
would,
difference.
they have the
Yeah,
same meter.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. That's it.
Does that kind of answer? I think that's kind of what you're asking.
Meter,
Yeah,
the-
yeah, so you can't really
Yeah.
cheat, you know what I mean? It doesn't
Yeah.
matter whether you burn the big one or the small one, it's
Right.
kind of the same meter.
Okay, yeah, that's. I guess I'm wondering if there are any concerns about these requirements pushing building owners to not alter buildings. Or to alter less of the building.
I mean, we haven't seen much of that at the city currently. What we usually see is people they come in and they want to talk to us on how they can comply. And so they're doing everything on their ability to comply. And so that was some of the reason kind of we looked at, you know, allowing for maybe an alternative program. And so we had some other suggestions of, you know, looking at some more stringent programs. And the reason we looked at kind of an alternative program along the lines of what the Zero Energy Ready is, a lot of the homes are currently doing that. It's a little bit more stringent program, and so it could help push the needle on where we're looking to go. But I think that, yeah, it's, sorry. I just, yeah. My ADHD kicked in, I apologize. For a second, I went blank, so.
Yeah, no, it is a legitimate concern,
Yes.
and I would say, one of my learnings in Boulder is social floodplain. So I think the floodplain requirements are probably more impactful on people not doing improvements than the building code, because it triggers things, and so you either see people do things they shouldn't or not do it. But I do think like Denver's approach, which is on replacement, so to ban future gas appliance installations after a certain date on replacement. I do think we have some concerns that people might just keep repairing. And so I think there needs to be some complements to help them make the right choice, not just required in code. So I think that's one of the things we're really thinking about, is how you couple it with incentives or other things to drive successful outcomes.
Yeah.
Code alone isn't going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the real nexus too is getting the community engagement with the right parties, because then at least you have everyone's buy-in. And this is good. It doesn't matter if we stay till midnight, you get everyone's buy-in.
You say.
Well, I know, and I'm prepared for that if I need to. Yep, I know. Meetings with,
Only since October.
I know. I was one of the meetings that I'm talking to them like, well, when your houses are 1,300 and 1,500 square feet, and these guys are laughing at me. And I'm like, what's so funny? And they're like, we don't see houses that small. And I was like, sorry. You know, I come from a little bit of a smaller town. What can I say?
Oh, 1,500, not 13,000, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 13,000 fit right in out here. What are you talking about?
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah, and then my last question, I think it's my last question. Second to last question, sorry, I'll be really quick. Is I saw also in the written materials that you provided us that there were exceptions for commercial kitchens, and I'm just wondering what is the like particular circumstance around commercial kitchens?
So currently, what I would say is the way that Denver is viewing it is possibly how we would view it right now. And so commercial kitchens are exempt. And the reason for that is with a lot that's going on with the Berkeley case out in California and preemption on the table. We're looking at different avenues to try and tackle that. But it's very a touch and go subject. And so at this moment, we really don't have a good answer on it, but it's something we're really looking at and considering. In all honesty, it looks like when you go for electrification, you try to do all electrification, but there are some trade-offs you have to make.
And this is a legitimate reason as why, you know, you might have certain types of culinary arts that require open flame cooking in there. It's pretty hard to do open flame cooking over an electric range, you know, so
That's like, yeah.
some of those things and cultural reasons in that too. So, you know, you gotta be reasonable when you move forward with things like this, and move the needle slowly.
Also, the cost barriers are pretty significant at this point, so I think there's a couple of building types, there's like laboratories, medical facilities that cost-effective electrification options aren't quite there yet, and so we definitely want to encourage and incentivize some early adopters. I think there's going to be, but I think as Rob said, a little early to.
Yeah. It's not quite there yet.
Some of us being cautious and, you know, like the earlier question in terms of what we may disincentivize or not even allow to happen. And of course, we would not want to see a circumstance where we don't allow restaurants in Boulder anymore because because. Yeah, but that would be the wrong direction.
Yeah, I like Korean barbecues.
Well, and I can say that for a lot of the TIs we're talking about with regards to the laboratories and that, they are coming in, they are very energy efficient too. So they do tip the scale on that. So there is natural gas, which is kind of the the elephant in the room with regards to that. But those occupancies are very efficient when you see it come through, so.
Okay, so for like heating, not for the cooking equipment.
Exactly.
We're just
that's
thinking about the cooking equipment, you know, I can't necessarily put a gas furnace.
Yeah, that was kind of towards the mention back of, you know, having electric ready on certain appliances and things of that nature versus tackling big equipment like your space and water heating, so.
Then my last, hopefully very quick question is, it also looked like, there was, you were trying to get a baseline, for building performance after, people moved in, like post occupancy. And no projects decided to join the pilot.
So, yes, so on that, so that is it's a newer option that we've seen. And so I think the reason behind it really is there's an unknown. You build a building, you get out there, it performs, you may or may not reach it. There's safeguards you can put in place, of course, to make sure that you do. But I think it's just the fact that it's a new path through code. And so we just didn't see anyone that wanted to dip their toe in that water and really try it. And so with this update, what we really want to do is kind of nudge them into the water to actually try it so we can get some good data to see where these are actually performing. And we do also require I think it's the Energy Star portfolio manager, the projects have to go in there and actually update their data, their usage. I think it's every 3?
Every year.
Every year, okay. So, but yeah, so there are tools that are available where they're able to track that usage, so.
We also had COVID and that sort of.
Yeah.
Okay. And whether anybody was gonna think creatively through that kind of pathway.
Well, and that threw the scales completely off because everyone was home now versus being in offices. So that changes that really kind of flipped a lot of energy usage on its head, we saw, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I have a handful of questions. So on that 5% for commercial buildings and 5% requirement for the offset. So why 5%? Is that just sort of like a hard and fast number that is like, that is the only feasible thing? Or I know it comes from a sort of like national level, like sort of codes. Is that just sort of like the wills that the national building codes have? Or like, what's the reasoning behind that number?
I'll answer this one again.
I got it. Yeah, right.
There's no strong math behind it, and it didn't come from the national code. It was something that we chose to introduce in the 2020
Okay.
COVAC because we weren't, and we got a good question from planning board last night about this as well, is well, the solar access requirements, the solar ready requirements we've had in code for a while, at least break down barriers to putting solar on in the commercial buildings. We weren't seeing a lot of movement on actually installing the solar.
Right.
But if you require a small amount to be installed, you're more likely to see them actually put more on, which is exactly what we saw. And so we picked a relatively small number. So that's not a large incremental cost of construction, but it got them to at least put solar on, and then we were seeing, 20-30% installs, well above the 5%.
Okay, so.
Yeah, we are seeing above the 5%.
Okay, so there is actual, like, it isn't just, because the behavior I don't expect is they just need that 5%.
Yeah, it's basically, it's starting them, and then once they get there, they're like, well, we're not gonna just do 5%, we might as well do 20.
Okay.
And so they're putting a lot more on the building.
They like pump installer.
Yeah.
Right, okay, cool. As if you were just seeing 5%, I would love to see that increase, but if there is after. And then around the incentives for the DOS Zero Energy Ready.
Mhm.
How much of that did the incentives actually cover? Like, how much of the payment onus is on the people like going into that program?
So it's hard to tell right now because of how the costs have really changed over the past couple of years. But there have been, there were older. There's older reports out there. I want to say one of them was I want to say NBI did one of them that I can think of, the New Buildings Institute. But it was really, when you looked at going from like zero energy ready to zero energy, it was really a drop in the hat to do zero energy ready compared to the zero energy. And so with the 45L tax credit, what it did is it incentivized homeowners that, if I remember correctly, it's $1,000 per home if you do it as Energy Star, and you do $5,000 if you do zero energy ready. And then multifamily, it's available as well. So multifamily, it's $500 a unit for zero energy ready. But if you do a prevailing wage, or it's $1,000 per unit for multifamily for zero energy ready. But if you do prevailing wage on your multifamily project, it's $5,000 per unit.
And do you know what the approximate full cost of the Zero Energy Ready is?
You mean like over?
Above to kind of get there, like what the additional incremental cost is to get it from.
With those incentives that are being provided, is it feasible for lower income families to actually buy into that? Or is it you need a $10,000 buy-in and you get some amount of that paid back, but you need that $10,000 up front?
So that's part of some of the research that our consultant's going to be doing. Yeah, to really understand that
right
piece.
now?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
And then last question is around the EV requirements for commercial buildings. So for the commercial parking space with the one space, that low number seems, fair, but with, the commercials for higher numbers of spaces, that seems like a really low requirement, especially because so many people go to work.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of people that I know a number of people that would love an electric car, but it just isn't feasible for them to go long distance. And if they have to commute into work, they can't charge their car at work, and then they, so they cannot feasibly get in. So is there a way to increase the numbers of required EV ready parking spaces for commercial buildings?
I'd say there's always the ability to do that, honestly. And so the thing that we try to weigh out, and it's more, I would say, for the EVSE, but it's the cost associated with
Right.
those, because the costs are still a little high. They are coming down,
Right.
but that is one thing that we're trying to weigh as well. But to answer your question, absolutely yes.
Okay.
We can definitely look at raising those numbers. Yeah.
Great.
And I would say generally, one of the areas that we see a lot of opportunity around is in the EV capable or this new category at the state, which is the EV capable light, which is just putting the conduit in.
Yeah.
I think if we can just get conduit in, we're at least eliminating one of the key barriers, which is the cost of digging up
Right.
parking lots.
Right.
And then especially parking structures
Yes.
underground, just thinking about more build out there.
Yes.
The real cost comes in two areas, which is like how much pre-wiring you do.
Right.
If it's not actually gonna have stations installed. And then the second one is how much utility service you have to provide.
Okay.
And that's a pretty big cost. And so I think that's the thing we would just want to balance and in both cases, but for sure, I think I'm going to advocate for more, at least conduit, those installations, yeah.
I mean, the way trends are going,
Yeah.
more and more people are owning electric cars, and so they're going to be needed at some point anyways, and so it would be nice to just see the building codes reflect that. Because that will, I mean, lower costs on those, commercial spaces further down when they do actually are required to have them.
Yeah.
At those higher number based on their employees. So yeah, that's.
We're right at the level where the state requires us, so we have to push the envelope and do more, you know? We're trying to lead that charge, so, yeah, absolutely.
Particularly with residential buildings.
Oh, yeah,
That's-
yeah,
that's
yeah,
really
yeah.
important.
Did you like the pun?
Yeah. You didn't like to be a fun.
No, I did not.
I think that.
No, I apologize.
Thanks again, guys, for your presentation. I have some just clarification questions. Is the complexity of writing an energy code for the 3,000 square foot house the same or different than writing an energy code that is net zero for a 5,000 square foot house?
So I want to say that the square footage of the house isn't different, but the net zero code is going to be, well, it depends. Because some net zero codes can be pretty simple because it's pretty straightforward. It's like you have to have zero energy use. And so it's like they tell you how to get what the goal line is and you have to get there. Now, there's other codes. I believe the 2021 IECC has a net zero section in it. Yeah, appendix. Thank you. That it's, I think, about a couple of pages, but it's very broad on how you do it because it kind of leaves it up to the homeowner on discovering their path forward. And so with us, with the energy code, there's other things. I mean, it's when we look at equity, it's like you can do net zero across the board for everyone, but that doesn't work for everyone. And so,
My next question, what are the reasons not, I imagine it's something with equity, but what you're doing for everybody?
yeah, and that's something that,
What's the premium? What's the cost of the premium? Let's say a house costs X amount of dollars to build 3,000 square feet.
Yeah.
What's the premium on that to make it net zero?
So maybe the thing I would offer is, as I think about our current residential code, it's just a outcome, it's performance outcome. And so it leaves a great deal of discretion to the designer in how to achieve that, right? So it can be through passive design, it can be through more efficient appliances than Energy Star, it could be through more solar. So they have the greatest amount of flexibility with that. When you move to a certification, then it starts to set some more prescriptive levels of requirements. So there's pros to that, obviously, because you're not necessarily just using a lot of solar to offset a poor performing building. But it also, I think we need to have some pathway that still offers some alternatives or more flexibility to design for what we maybe aren't anticipating in just like a certification program offers. So that's kind of the way I think of the.
For smaller homes, have more flexibility?
It's probably less concerning for the smaller homes. I think when we start to see some of the larger custom homes, they do different things or more I'll call them just not standard designs where an Energy Star standard an appliance necessarily fits within what they're doing within that house.
Wait, so I guess I'll go back to my first question.
excuse me.
What exactly cannot do an energy goal for a 500 square foot house, for example,
Oh, no, we have one. So we have a performance outcome for when it's not currently zero, it's 50.
Which
So
is
it's
good.
50% better than code.
50%.
Very, very good.
On the 0 is 50%?
No, it's basically when you look at an ERI, it's on a scale of 0 to 100, and 100 is a house that's built in 2006, really is what that basis of that code is. And so what we really look at is we want to get it closer to 0, because 0 on that scale is you have 0 energy use. You offset all of your energy use. And so that's why, like at 50, typically when you get below like between 40 to 50, that's when you're going to start seeing people have to add solar to get down to 0. And so the real benefit of like the DOE zero energy ready home is one of the things that you'll hear us quote is it's efficiency before renewables. It's focus on the building, focus on the systems. Don't use solar as a bandage to fix the problem, because it's not going to. And so that's why we have backstops in there for like the actual envelope and shell of the building to make sure that we can protect certain investments moving forward, because systems may change and things like that. But the envelope is something that we can safeguard really as we move through our energy code update. So.
I have more questions.
Wait, I'm not done.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You missed true. So I remember seeing something about like if a building wants to use, a commercial building wants to use gas, they can do offsets.
We have to do offsets. That's what we're proposing.
Have you thought about expanding that to residential? Just because I say that because I just got a really nice gas stove.
Same on. I know.
It's not really nice.
It's so hot. But it's like, okay, let's say, obviously I'm gonna get grandfather. Let's say I want to remodel my home, or I'm building a new home, and I found this really nice wall gas range. It's like, is there something I can do to offset that, like I wonder if you will consider expanding this offset for residential too.
So typically what we've seen usually is they'll try and offset with solar. And so that's really what we see it come from with natural gas, if they try to use it. 'Cause at the end of the day, even if you're using a net zero home, and they have gas use, you still have to offset that gas use with solar. So, or another renewable, it doesn't have to be solar.
Yeah,
So-
but I think maybe what I'm hearing from on is I think, yes, we can expand it to solar, to residential, it's sort of there in the way the codes done today, because you have to offset, but I think you present a good question, which is more of an alteration. And if we're like, at what level do we require the offset? So we can definitely look at that.
Yeah, because even for new construction, not only remodeling, but like, I don't know if there was an option to offset those emissions.
Right.
Yeah.
Is solar the only way to do it? For example,
I mean, you can do there's other ways to do it.
Practical.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes,
like for example, I had like a solar company come to my home to give me a quote. And they didn't even come. They just look at it on Google Maps and say, like, you have too many trees.
Yeah.
And then they didn't come. He said, like, I cannot do it.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, let's say, like, do I cut down a tree?
Well, no, I wouldn't say cut down a tree. Solar.
Way more insulation in your matter. That's
We
a.
definitely need to spend some quality time together and talk about. No, I mean, there are other ways. We currently have, just to comply with our current codes. Some homeowners have had to also get, like solar garden subscriptions, to meet our code. So there's other things you can do, to create that offset. So it's not just about the rooftop, and we have pathways there. We're trying not to drive everybody to offsite solutions, because that's not necessarily advancing our reasons for having an onsite, but it's definitely a tool that's available.
Yeah. Yeah, in residential, we have it written in that you can use it, but there's a certain level of due diligence that you have to prove on it. And once you're able to check these 3 boxes, then it goes to the chief building official and they have to approve it. On commercial, it really doesn't have a path for offsite other than approval through the chief building official. So, yeah.
And another reason of less superficial, I guess, is like, usually when there are big storms, I always lose electricity and my entire block loses electricity.
Don't use your gas stove without electricity.
I know.
Not do that. Bring out the kerosene.
Water. And what I'm saying is like, gas can be a little more reliable than electricity, like electrical outages are more common.
Yeah.
But your gas appliances don't work without electricity.
Really, I have hot water.
The water heater will.
Water
If you have an
heater will.
80%, if you have an old water heater, it will. If you have a new one, it will not.
bypass the, yeah.
Yeah, then like I have a new old tank water heater, it does not, unfortunately, my old one did. But my old one was only 80% efficient, my new one's 96% efficient, so that's the trade-off, you know?
Yeah, mostly they don't want them to still work when you
Yeah.
don't have electricity, so.
I guess
And don't just try and light it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's your public service announcement.
Yeah. If you smell something, do not light it.
But I guess, so we try to push for like electrification,
Right.
Yeah.
natural gases can be more reliable.
It gives you another layer of resiliency, you see that second fuel source, and
Yeah.
then there's reservations of power by natural gas, so they're independent of the electrical grid typically.
Yeah,
So as we try to push for electrification, are there any talks we have with Excel, for example, to be like, hey, like, why all, like, it's all.
Oh, seriously, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm on speed.
Yeah, so to be clear, if you live in an urban area, you should have an expectation for high reliability, and that is the standard that we're working towards.
Great answer. I like that.
I know. I think my last question, just building up on what Brooke said, the incentives, like you mentioned insulation, so I put insulation in my attic, I have a nice, an old 60 house. Have like 4 inches of insulation. And so I got insulation. And I remember like the rebate from Excel was like $400. But to apply for it, you had to get a home inspection to come, which was like $350. Yeah. And then like I got the schedule for them to come up, like I didn't do it. I was just like, go. Go blow it.
You're talking about an earth grader come in and basically verify the insulation.
Yeah, because they wouldn't give me the rebate without like.
Oh, they just wanted.
I just had this conversation with Excel, I'm like, I'm actually building a virtual. Do it, and I said, no, I'm like. You know, like.
It's just an Excel conversation.
Sorry.
I was back. I don't like
It's back in just a little.
What I'm getting at, like, can we make these rebates more accessible or easier, because of like I had to schedule, like. I didn't do it because it was like $50. It's worth it to be like calling this company, scheduling for me to come, inspect the attic, submit the paperwork, like it just.
Yeah.
It wasn't worth it, so.
Yeah.
It's like.
Let's say we don't have much influence over what Excel.
Well, maybe the solution there is to suggest maybe Excel has some type of inspection division that can verify that if they're gonna be doing those rebates.
I mean, the answer to it is, it's to ensure there's quality. So they have to take. They're supposed to be good stewards of our ratepayer dollars that go to their demand side management program. So they have to be cost effective in delivering this efficiency, and so they have to make sure that they understand what this net savings is going to be from your home, so that they can credit it appropriately. So that's why it's designed that way. I understand it doesn't necessarily drive the adoption because it doesn't balance out the cost and the barriers.
Because, by them saying like, we need it to be verified, we're gonna offer you $400 as a rebate for that. I mean, Capital, as it says, the company that does the verification is gonna charge as much as they.
It's too small. Yeah, we all agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not about the money, they're just like. Yeah, no, the verification, like, there must be an easier way, I don't know, like.
It's.
Having to. Yeah, but having to call this third party company, I don't know, it just seems.
Yeah.
It's.
Well, they've been trained in the verification of that.
Let me get us back on. Really, this program, the project the judge is working on, will not be working on incentives and noted that.
Yes.
Opportunities and options out there to understand the guardrails.
Exactly.
Thank you. Won't be those programs. You could. That's so much work program, Karen will be happy to take.
It's okay. If you
Well,
bringing us back in, I'm good.
If
with
you're
it.
curious about any of this incentives, holler at me too, because I can, there's a website Desire that's online that you can go to a ton of incentives that you can look up on there, so, yeah. And then it's just these outside, so.
Alex, why don't you go ahead, ask your questions, and then we'll start again with you. And you can maybe provide feedback on the three, there's one answer.
So yeah, I have a couple questions on embodied carbon and then a couple of others. So one, you have noted in the packet that we got that there are some incentives using the 1% allowance to try to basically incentivize maintaining some of the structure and capture some of that embodied carbon. I guess similar to Brooke's question, you know, where was the 10% number arrived at, or how do we know that that's a sufficient incentive such that people will actually try to capitalize on that? And why is it only applied to level 4 alterations as opposed to a broader scope? I don't know if you can, I guess, answer those questions specifically, or just speak to the trying to preserve some of the embodied carbon rather than complete new construction.
I was gonna say, you were around when.
Yeah, so maybe the way to describe what we did at the time is we didn't move the bar for existing structures that remain. So anything that was at level 4 or less invasive, we kept under the 2017 performance requirements, and we only moved the new construction. So it created the 10% difference that wasn't necessarily a calculation, or there wasn't necessarily outreach to support it. It was I'll call it more of a signal making it easier to, because when you go to 50, I think as Josh mentioned, like when you get into 40 to 50, like that's kind of a really good tight house, and it's really hard to get it much better than that, especially if you're doing a remodel. And so the 60 kind of is a little bit more doable. And I think we were a little bit concerned, less about like trying to incentivize preserving and more about not creating a condition where you actually had no choice, but to scrape and start over with maybe a little bit more of the thinking at the time. So I think there's definitely more things that can be done to incentivize preservation of the existing structure that we could certainly look at.
And then still within the umbrella of the embodied carbon, are there any, maybe not incentives, but are there any conditions regarding where material is sourced from, or the companies that are needed to do this work? Obviously, you know, the farther out your reach, the higher the embodied carbon is. One, is that anything that we can have control of, or two, is that a discussion point amongst you all and all?
I would say it is a discussion point. That's something we're probably gonna be doing research on as we're gonna be touching on embodied carbon. That is an aspect of embodied carbon's transportation. And that's one of the key things really is to, that might be a little bit of a heavier lift because there's a lot of stakeholders that are involved in that industry. And so it's having people understand that, and it's getting a lot of other folks on board. As well as we look to pursue this, because it takes, this topic here really will take a village to make sure that we can move the needle on it, because it is the next frontier that we're seeing. And the reason that we looked at is if we're leapfrogging energy is just one piece of carbon. It's the operational side. We really wanted to look at, everything. And so that's why we really looked at this. But yeah, sorry for the long answer to a short question, but yes, we will be looking at that. So
What we have to be careful of is we can't really through code show preferences to certain vendors or certain things. And right, so it's just that will only use concrete from here of this company or anything of that nature. We end up in conflicts, not in our interest. So we have to be really cautious in terms of how we do that, or the consumer choice is still out there where we have different options and offset opportunities versus being able to just say all material can only be within 5 miles. We know that's not.
Well, we also need to be pragmatic in that we have limited resources to actually enforce some of these codes. So we need to sort of pick the low hanging fruit off the tree, unfortunately, sometimes, and leave sort of nice stuff like that.
I do think there's opportunity like for concrete. I mean, because there's so many other jurisdictional requirements of state funding is now starting to overlay. And so I think we're seeing industry build up that capacity closer, but it's definitely like we're a little bit cautious about prescribing things when we know like the only sourcing is gonna worsen the situation. So I think that's definitely as we look to kind of the strategies is to really plan for that and be cautious about being too prescriptive and maybe allow for greater flexibility and be prescriptive where we know that we're seeing regional influence that's going to drive market here.
I know that was your question, but elaborate more on what you were talking about with concrete. Are you saying that there are more concrete providers in Colorado, or that there are more jurisdictions putting requirements on concrete?
Yeah, there's more jurisdictions putting requirement on carbon content in concrete.
Okay.
And so that means our concrete providers here are going to adopt more of the sequestered carbon mix into the concrete to meet the ANSI standard for the lower carbon materials.
Part of how to look at that is if more users have the same requirement,
Right.
then the providers are going to meet it because they have a market, they really don't have a choice necessarily. If we decide we want to go from where the main users are up here, we have to determine, well, will there be provider? Will anybody go to there? If we don't have enough demand, we don't have enough pieces, nobody's going to be willing to invest. We don't want to create a situation where it then says, well, therefore you cannot have any concrete because if you get a supplier for it, that's going to have a negative consequence.
Or the only supplier quadruples the price.
Yeah.
Because they now prescribe.
Yeah. So, and I do want to highlight the thing that Rob said, and it's the ones that I will always do. Is the actual ability to administer and enforce any of the regulations. And I unfortunately at times get to be that guy that has to bring us back to reality to say that. Great. I have no idea how you're going to make that work. And that's even we have to be cautious as we talk about these things such as the performance modeling after. Real key to when we can get the best of enforcement is when they need that paper that says they're allowed to occupy the building that impacts their finances. After that, how many cases do you have with EPO for that?
I suspect they're going to start getting fewer.
And so, it becomes a harder thing to do, which then becomes a question of
The price tag on what would go out today.
can make some friends, right? Part of that then becomes what are our limited resources? We have a limited resource, especially in human capital and time, that we can put towards things. So what do we want to do there? You also don't want to create a situation where you have something that people know, you have no way, you're never going to enforce. It causes them to disrespect the entirety of your code to some degree.
So I have a final question. And this is more from the equity lens. So I really appreciate you guys acknowledging and bringing into the discussion that we don't want just those who own the largest homes to reap the largest benefits. But then I guess with this, a lot of the focus being on residential and incentives there and codes for that. Is there a way to wrap into that discussion, non-homeowners, unhoused populations, as well as kind of what benefits might they see, or are there things that we might be missing that they can benefit from kind of this code planning process that maybe we haven't accounted for because we're very focused on those who own homes. Obviously, there's a commercial sector involved in this. I guess that's a very open-ended question, but if there are things that you or the board have.
There's a different code for rentals, right? Or
Not for the construction. So it's important to point out that, this is not written towards whether it's owner occupied, renter occupied, or some other piece. And in fact, substantial amount of the residential being built is rental here and has to meet usually it's the high commercial standard because it's multifamily. So we don't look at it different there. The city does have in place on I'll call it the single family residential. Really the rental stock that's existing, not under construction. The smart rates program is called, still is, and it had a component of bringing better energy efficiency, not to the level you're seeing in these codes, but that's also another part of owner occupied unless they're building something. So we have over history, and then that started 12 years ago. So the smart rates, they're moving some of those. So yeah, there are different types of programs, whereas this is truly focused just on construction.
So is there any sort of incentives that can be established for, say, low income housing or things tied into that vein that would still fall under the scope of new construction and codes, and maybe, I don't know how much incentive control we have, like you said it before, but kind of on that side of rental / homeownership, but towards the lower income population?
I think the one thing I would say is, again, we have that we structured building codes historically. Knowing that we were going to be really aggressive, right? And focusing on the largest structures, whether it was homes or commercial, that had the greatest impact, but also could afford an incremental cost, and ended up with the wrong paradigm. Right? Homes are expensive, buildings are expensive here, and it's not the energy requirements that are driving them to be expensive. So let's stop that paradigm. And let's provide community resilience through our affordable energy costs for everybody. And I think that's really kind of what we're trying to ground here. Like the incremental cost of efficiency, we're talking about $700, $800 a square foot construction cost because of other market constraints, and very small. And so I think that's what you're really hearing from us is let's not keep doing that far where the affordable housing is being built to a lesser standard. I think that's first and foremost, and then separate from this, from a code perspective, then I think the onus is on us as a city to think about our other dollars that can further make that more accessible. And that's very much on the horizon. So not necessarily within the code, but definitely parallel as we drive more stringent code to make sure that we're complementing that with the right incentives and financial backstops. And we're certainly looking at that. Thank you.
The thing to keep in mind, the affordable housing that's being built now generally is coming under the commercial, so we don't really see the 3,005. That could be affordable housing is not building the individual single family units qualified under the residential definition in the LG code. And I don't foresee that changing.
Yeah, I can say that equity is really a key piece for me. I can say that I've been here since October. I can't afford to live in Boulder. I have a home that's 1,300 square feet, not in the state, but I have a home that's small. And so it does hit home for me on the equity piece.
You want to make it available for everyone, and it shouldn't be based on people just being able, well, they can just afford to do it because they're the wealthiest. No, it should be available to everyone. That's really what we're trying to do is to try to bring that back. So,
In a more black and white 35,000 foot view, the building code is a minimum standard. And we want to apply the same minimum standards whether you're poor or whether you're wealthy, right? So like if you look at say a fire sprinkler system, we don't want to say, well, a rich person can afford a fire sprinkler system and a poor person can't, right? So we're kind of applying the same methodology to the energy code.
The only thing I would look at is residential side. We really have much happening under 3,000.
Yeah.
Moving it to zero,
Right.
maybe the right way. Target the right goal for establishing a vision in it, man. Very little real impact because it's not being built.
and it can be harder too as the unit gets smaller. We know that we require infiltration testing in single family homes, multifamily. We know that as those units get smaller, it becomes harder and harder to hit those targets. So we know that as the alterations in the homes get smaller, it can become harder and harder. And then back to the point of solar, well, they may not have space on their site to do it, and so there's certain constraints too that we're looking at.
Filtration testing.
Sorry, so have you ever heard of a blower door test?
Air leak.
Air leak test?
Oh.
Yeah, so
How dry
you'll
they get.
see people that'll throw up like a tarp in the door and they'll have a fan in it and they suck all the air out of the home, so.
Yeah.
If I used to get to do those, so. But yeah, people get upset with you when you do them, but the interesting thing is they don't lie. It tells you where their leak points are, and they're like, hey, you can't get mad at me, get mad at your builder.
It's also the biggest, source of energy loss in the home.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
I guess we're gonna move on to providing our recommendations. Okay. Everybody done asking questions? How does it want to start?
Yeah, sure, I can. I like your areas of focus. I think they have a lot of merit and I don't really have any problems with them. So I think that was fantastic presentation and thank you for answering all of our questions. So for that piece, I think I'm in agreement with that. to me, based on our discussions and our questions, all of it did seem to, or they were encompassed by your 5 areas of focus, so I didn't really target anything in addition to that. And then for the final point for engaging the public, I guess I have a preliminary question. What are you doing currently to engage the public and getting feedback for these?
Next, the interesting thing, so when we do building codes, there's not generally a broad public engagement around that. So we definitely prioritize kind of, core stakeholders, so your designers, builders, our housing authorities, our other, regular builders and builders. So I think that's for sure going to happen, as well as our boards, as we're doing here. I think if there's things that we haven't thought of in the traditional or doing flag, that would be kind of where our question is. I mean, again, the average homeowner or any business doesn't really tend to engage in building code specifically because it's a little bit hard and tangible for them, I think. But definitely trying to hear some of the things we're trying to solve for are certainly things that we're hearing from the broader public. So it's maybe not as direct, like here's what we're thinking about with the building codes, but I think we've certainly been hearing about experiences and challenges when people have been going forward with these projects that we're trying to carry forward.
And I think it's back to the practicality point, right? We take the code in there and it could be this level. And after talking with everyone, they may rein it down to this level. It's like, we can't do this. And so it's a lot of good, positive back and forth that we're looking to have. And my apologies for leading on you. I was like, what did we done in the past?
So, yeah, no, it's fair. We already established here.
I'm on the bus track, so I Thank you.
Guess I don't have any current recommendations. If I think of one, we can circle back.
Yeah, so as I said before, there's a lot in here that I'm really excited about, and I really liked reading your focus areas. I am wondering, since I have more comments other than this, but a little bit maybe off topic, but since we're talking about building codes, I think it is important to mention if we're going to be talking about remodels or alterations, is there anything in the building code about checking for lead pipes and replacing them? Because I think that's
So not in building codes. So the building code treats materials, if they were legal at the time of construction, they're still legal. So if you have lead water supply pipes,
So
we don't like that.
but let me chime in. There is a different project underway right now as it relates to lead service lines
Yeah.
and requirements. The EPA and the state of Colorado have. The utilities department is in the lead of that extensive process. It's going through a catalog determination, and then we have to, as a city, have a replacement plan put into place. So that is for the line all the way from the main 18 inches into the house.
Okay.
Beyond that, what's in the house is covered under the building code as long as it's
Oh,
listed.
okay. So-
And generally, though, we are not aware of much of our stock, if any.
Okay.
with lead.
It's
like
pretty rare. I mean, they tended to use them back in the day because they could unroll it like copper pipe nowadays, and it's practically easy to install. But once they got to the house, they would typically transition to steel piping
Okay.
with copper. So it's actually pretty rare. We see it as drain pipes. Like my house has lead drain pipes, but it's not rare because it goes to the,
Yeah.
you know,
Right, it's not going in.
yeah.
Was there a time that they changed that to the good standards that they have right now? Because I live in an older building, so I'm not sure what, or are you saying?
How old is the building you live in?
Or maybe the 50s?
So it's possible that it could have a lead supply line. It's probably.
part of the work that we're doing with
Yeah.
utilities now. It was 1984, I believe, when lead was prohibited
Yeah.
for use in water distribution. At this point, we don't have a lot of evidence in the city of Boulder that we have any extensive. At this point, much at all. There's probably more likely some areas that were like solder or maybe connections like the goosenecks. That's as we work through determining more of that. The program itself that's being kicked off the utilities will include a number of actual field verifications.
Yeah, okay.
We're going to be doing work out there to try and use that along with data to come up with a probability of it being lead or not lead in order to meet the EPA regulations.
Okay. And so you're saying the part that the city controls, that once it's into the building is very usually not lead.
In Boulder, it has not been from what we have
Okay.
seen. Been asking even our staff that are out in a lot of different places, as you've seen over the last 10 years, as you've done repairs and stuff, what do we see
Okay.
there? We do not have, or I'm very confident saying, we don't have a situation like Detroit where
Yeah.
it can be so in different parts of the US, lead is much more prevalent.
Okay.
In Boulder, it's not, at least been so far. By October of 2024, we're going to be able to say with much more certainty to a high probability.
Okay, great. Yeah, and so I guess back to the energy code. Now I saw that retail, hospital and small hotel weren't included in the COBCC. COBECC, even in 2024, and I'm wondering why not retail or small hospital or small hotel, sorry.
So I put those on that list there because there is a lot more that are available currently. I want to say when we probably set out to do the 2020 COBAC, we were wanting to pick a set amount of buildings, and they probably had a limited number of building types to choose from previously.
Okay.
And so that's why we chose the building types that we did. And so in recent years, they've expanded on those. And so that's why with this update, we're looking to see if we can bring more building types in to allow for that pathway through code.
I think the question mark is indicative of we're expecting to add them.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, yeah, that was also interesting because we at this board had a presentation earlier about consumption-based accounting, and we saw that hospitals and healthcare were a huge portion of our embodied carbon, and obviously have a lot of different moving parts and obstacles to decarbonization. But yeah, so I guess my question for that would be, are there any outreach strategies that you're doing with hospitals, with facility managers of hospitals for how to decarbonize, how you might bring them into the COBECC
So
2024?
I don't think we've thought about that, but that's not a bad idea. I don't know about.
I would caution, we're not building new hospitals.
No, exactly. And that's kind of why that was my other comment was gonna be, they probably left it out because we don't see any hospitals, but I think what we would do is, yeah.
Smaller.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, for urgent care.
But I think
For the renovation.
it's really engage the design professionals that handle those buildings and see what they've seen and kind of what they would recommend. Not to say that people in the buildings wouldn't have a good idea, but their job's a little different than understanding the materials. And so that's why my thought was just go to the source maybe with that. But that's a great comment. I didn't even think about that. And definitely
It's a difficult sector too, because
It
there's a lot
is.
of ventilation requirements. The mechanical code always takes precedence over the energy code.
Lead-based sheetrock, yeah.
Yeah, so there's lots of other codes that take precedence over the energy code in situations like that.
And we want to make sure that the work we're doing in the energy code has a significant impact. So it's not something that building, but yeah, the limited resources we have to work on the code, we want to make sure we focus to those things that are moving the community.
Yeah, that is true, but the reason I brought up that presentation we had earlier was because we saw that healthcare had one of the highest embodied carbon in the city. So I think it is a really important sector to focus on, and so doing that outreach, and obviously with all of the moving parts in hospitals, but being able to like understand what they already do, that is different from the rest of the business sector, and then being able to work with that. I think it's something that I would put as a priority also.
Well, and they do still currently have a pass-through code, they just can't use the fixed baseline, they just have to model it. And so they do still have a pathway through it, it's a little bit more intensive because they have to model the baseline in that, but I think too, like when looking at hospitals, one of the key things I think with hospitals is concrete. Concrete's one of the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to early carbon reduction, and that's probably what they mentioned on the slide, and that's kind of back to our point of.
It's all of their single use items.
Yeah,
It's a big deal, and then,
yes, yeah, good point.
but interestingly enough, our hospital's probably gonna be happy to do something. Because it's now subject to the state building performance standard and it's not there.
Oh. Okay, well then.
But definitely, we agree, yeah.
Yes.
Definitely turn it around.
Yeah.
Clear.
Yeah, and that's also interesting, the point that was brought up about concrete, it was pretty recent actually, but I'm sure people in circles, in the building circles are becoming aware of it, but there was some research that was recently done on Roman buildings, the ancient Roman buildings, and how they manufactured concrete in a way that was actually less energy intensive, and they added limestone so that the concrete could actually regenerate itself during like rainfall. And so there is less of a need to replace the concrete that's already there. So you know, if we haven't heard about it,
Sure.
I don't know if we get enough rainfall or anything like that.
well, we are
That's a
starting.
Let's say in the last 2 weeks.
I know, right?
High desert.
We do live in a desert.
Yeah.
I do think we need to call a scene.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
Think to
Well,
yourself.
but-
I know, right?
But yeah, I mean, yeah, and especially if we're talking about like C and D waste, we would produce less C and D waste if we used it for generating kind of concrete. So it's something that I would love to look into.
Amanda?
Yeah.
We have 2 more agenda items.
Oh,
Can you? And I wanna have, get broken, myself trying to
yeah.
feedback. Sorry.
I guess my last thing is, can we have incentives for developers to turn the house south? To make a more passive energy, kind of building. And that would also use less energy, be more energy efficient. Especially because it lets more light in the winter time and the. Yeah. It's been I know it's been a discussion for like a few years at least.
It could be similar to what we're looking at with the level 3 alterations of trying to encourage, we can reduce the ERI target or something like that to where.
Yeah.
It incentivize them to reconsider, just make thoughtful design decisions, really. Yeah, so.
Okay, and I think. Yeah, maybe have like a very small incentive for the school building if buildings were to participate in that baseline pilot study. That's what I would suggest. That's it.
Cool. I mean, I'm pretty low on recommendations. I just, as I mentioned earlier, I'd love to see more EV parking requirements and just higher requirements on those. And solar panels, I guess 5% is fine if we're seeing a lot more, but it would also be great to see higher minimums because I'm sure not all companies are going above the minimum. And so it would be great to see higher minimums for commercial buildings. I know they weren't a huge focus of the presentation tonight, but just in general, I'd love to see more restrictions on commercial buildings than on residential. Those are, big, like conglomerations of carbon emissions, that aren't necessarily viable, like visible in the building like code, but like all the people commuting in is not necessarily going to be in the building code. So it'd be great to see, more offsets in the building code to help offset sort of the transportation as you were talking about earlier. And I don't know to what extent you do when working on building and energy codes, but working directly with potential incentives that the city could provide to see where you could tighten parts of the codes and make them more that might be more like higher cost, but if the city could offer an incentive to sort of mirror that so that you could have sort of some more efficiency within the codes that is enabled by the sort of city incentive. I don't know to what extent you do that already, but it'd be great to see that if it isn't done. My two recommendations.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, following up on what you said, like, do we have any data on the ratio of gas vehicles versus like EV? Like, to kind of justify the parking requirements?
1% of vehicles are EVs in the United States. About 1% of vehicles in the United States are electric vehicles.
I'm thinking Bowling might be a little higher though.
Yeah, so we're higher, I can't quote you the number, we're in the teens on new vehicles, and so then I think our vehicle stock is somewhere in the mid, like 5-6% at this point. Yeah, it's somewhere, yeah, we can look it up.
And new vehicles is definitely 10. I was reading about that today. That was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we still have the highest adoption rate in the state. But again, you have to wait for.
All the old ones to cycle through.
I mean, we had this question during the energy code conversation, right? And I think within the lifetime of these buildings, we're going to be hitting the state roadmap of 60% of new sales, and I think it's 30% of stock, those types of numbers. And so I think those are definitely ones we should plan for. In terms of the lifetime of these buildings, and certainly it's the lifetime of the parking services.
There are 81,723 EVs on the road in Colorado right now.
81,000.
Yeah.
Whatever percentage of vehicles that is.
Yeah.
That's the number. It's not a huge.
I have 1 EV and 4 gas cars. I don't know how that makes me look.
Hey, at least you have an EV.
I park them in my garage.
I'm thinking I need to change positions within the city.
They're all junkers. They're not nothing special.
But the shoot, they go away here 4 weeks. We did not help. That was part of the reason we did, right? Yeah, the EV car.
But yeah, I agree on the proposed areas of focus. I think they do cover areas of interest. Other areas of focus that should be included. Not really. I think just like I said earlier, explored options to do offsets of natural gas for residential as well, in addition to commercial, which is what you already planned. And there was there was a paragraph about barriers to on-site solar, which goes back to what I was saying earlier, with houses like mine that have a lot of trees. It seems like that's something you're exploring. There's no really so just that's something that I will say it's important because you have a lot of houses here, like probably don't get a lot of sun maybe. So yeah, those two things I will say are of importance to me. And in terms of community engagement, I don't really have any strategies or ideas. I mean, I think what you're doing is good, targeting the developers, the designers, because I don't think the public, I don't know, it just seems like this will be better targeted towards developers and designers and people, who make these buildings. So
HOAs.
Have to maintain them, yeah.
So yeah, I think that's all I have to say. I want to thank you guys again for coming here and
Thank you. Anything else?
Yeah.
There's an email from Crystal Gray that, if you guys received it.
Yeah.
I would like to say I agree with most of her points, so.
And I did forward that to Carolyn, so would you mind sharing it with?
Yep, I will share that with the team and appreciate it. So yes, we did receive those. And then again, to our member from the public also, to feel free to reach out to us or the board. That would be great.
One more thing on that note, she asked if we could provide accurate information to newspapers so the public knows what the considerations are. So if there's more outreach that can be done to the community just for educational purposes and awareness.
Yeah.
Yes, that is.
And as a courtesy, before you guys present to council, if you could just send us the one paragraph summarizes what we discussed today, just to make sure that it reflects our points of view, that would be great.
Definitely.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Look for it tomorrow.
Yeah. it's all right.
All right, sounds good, thank you.
You have a placeholder for it already, right?
Oh,
Yeah. We do. We already wrote it, you know, just.
yeah.
Not taking credit for that.
Yeah.
That's
I see a lot of nice things, but I don't know what.
Okay, guys. Well, so thank you again for coming here tonight.
We're gonna run away. That's okay. with
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Seth. It was great meeting everyone.
Yeah, have a good night.
What do you want to do?
You can leave them now, I'll take care of it.
Anybody else? I think I ordered some money.
See me more. I'm gonna give you all my exam. Oh, yeah. I did some challenges. No, not much. We've had a couple, but they were real, they were, that's like, oh, my SEC code.
Yeah. Welcome. Thank you.
We had one exam, the risk will be challenges that were all stupid there.
Yes.
Class sizing and stuff.
It was in regards to just a simple question. Oh, yeah, like it's.
Yeah.
Yeah, more to come. Okay. Complicated, but more to come.
Stay tuned.
Great
movie, by the way.
Picking up my 4 stars, so. Like it's bad.
Oh, they're raising rents by $350 next year. Per month, yes. $50 is for parking outside instead of parking in the garage. $75.
55 to park in the garage,
$50 to park outside of the garage.
a huge difference. Seems like it should be a lot cheaper to park outside the garage than inside.
It seems like free.
It should be included in your bet.
We are on land use code discourages that and says it should be unsettled.
They're like.
How dare you own a car?
Paying my rent's not up to 50.
One request that you have is you leave the building, can you just push the door to make sure it latches? Like,
No.
Wow, you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Good one.
Bye. All right, guys, we got 15 minutes, so let's just move on to the last 2 items in the agenda. The next one is let's talk about like the memo that Jonathan put as part of the notes. And it's basically for us to discuss if there are any items that are up, that are coming up before council the next couple of months that we would like to also be in the loop. So if you go to the last page, page 23, there is these additional council items anticipated. If you see anything that you think we could provide input for, I guess now is the time to discuss it. I don't particularly see anything, but I don't know. What do you guys think? I want to open up for discussion.
I mean, potentially the any of the housing or the sort of University Hill commercial or the commercial things would be might potentially have something that depending on the angles that they're working with. So that's going to depend, I think, entirely on sort of what the revisions are looking at.
what is the date on that item?
August
August 10th, yeah, August 10th is the earliest one, but August 10th, August 17th. Yeah, so. Those items that.
So maybe if we can get a little more information on what the agenda will be for those study sessions for the University Hill Commercial revitalization update. Maybe the affordable commercial program development, that's also the same date.
Budget, 2024 budget.
Yeah, 2024 budget, that will be a good one.
The affordable, can you go back to the first?
The affordable commercial program development, a study session on August 10th. And then September 14th, there's a study session on the 2024 budget. So perhaps that will be something we could get some input as well. But yeah, just basically, I think we want a little more information before we say like, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
let's,
it's things that could potentially
yeah,
have something that we could, voice in on, but there isn't enough information involved to really know.
And then I think I would feel similarly about the Boulder Junction land use map amendments. Again.
Yeah.
More information just to understand if that's
Yeah.
in our.
What is the date of that?
That is September 21st. It's a public hearing.
Okay.
I think I got them.
And maybe the safe, well, no, not.
What is East Boulder FBC?
East Boulder FBC.
Update PNDS.
I'm not sure.
I just don't know what those.
I'm not sure. PDS is Planning and Development Services. I'm not sure what they. Yeah, I can, what's the date of that one?
That is September
28th.
28th. I just don't know what it is, but if it's planning, it could be related to environmental.
Yeah,
We're gonna have an environmental aspect to it.
definitely get more information from you all.
All right, the last item in the agenda will be the next environmental advisory board meeting is scheduled for July 5th. I propose that we move it to July 12th. Just because it's really close to July 4th, and people may be on vacation or recovering from a vacation. So, do you guys have any objections to that or what? Any opinions? Is that okay?
I have no objection.
Yeah, I have no objection.
Okay, so I motion to move the next meeting to July 12th.
I'll second that.
Okay. Then, and Heather, what will be, do we have any agenda for them? I mean, I remember you showed me a calendar with all the several topics. You know what we will be
I
discussing?
cannot recall off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Okay, guys, so I think with that said, I think we are done. So I motion to conclude the meeting today.
Any second.
Okay.
Thank you.